We're making a strategic leadership transition, Gavin from HR said, eyes avoiding mine. Sloane Fitzgerald will take over your role. Sloane? She's been here 5 weeks. 27 actually, he corrected. She brings contemporary methodologies. I almost laughed. I built this department from 3 people to 47. Our client retention is 96%. What needs transforming? He slid a manila envelope across the table. You'll become chief advisor. Same pay. Your institutional knowledge is invaluable. Institutional knowledge. Corporate shorthand for, we no longer need you. My new office was a windowless box at the end of the hall. My old one, corner Harborview, now belonged to Sloane, who'd already swapped out my awards for leadership certificates and lavender diffusers. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. At the first team meeting, she sat at the head of the table and announced plans to optimize accounts, mispronouncing client names and mangling basics of our service model. Our work with Thornbridge Solutions. Thornberry Logistics, I corrected. And they're particular about accuracy. The room fell silent. Then Derek spoke up. Doesn't your timeline conflict with their quarterly assessment? Sloane blinked. We can adjust. It requires 8 weeks prep, Lindsay added. That's been standard for a decade. Sloane shuffled papers, finding nothing. My phone buzzed. A message from Elliot Thornberry, CEO of our largest client. Emergency call tomorrow. This doesn't feel right. I tucked the phone away and let myself smile. This was only the opening move. I kept my head down, pretending to sort files, when Brandon stormed out of Sloane's office and strode toward me, smile tight with desperation. Harlow, we need you on the Thornberry call, now. Of course, I said, all innocence. What happened? Sloane pitched new service concepts. Elliot's furious. In the conference room, Sloane sat pale and rigid. The moment Elliot heard my voice, his tone warmed. Finally, someone who understands how business actually works. I walked him through the mix-up, restored his confidence, and by the end he was laughing. That's why we've stayed 9 years. It's about trust, not flashy slides. Brandon praised my advisory support. I thanked him politely and left, Sloane's glare burning into my back. That was just the first domino. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern repeated. Sloane would overhaul something vital, clients would revolt, and I'd be called in to quietly fix it. Always playing the helpful advisor while documenting every misstep. The real work, the relationships, had always lived outside the CRM in years of trust I'd built. 3 weeks in, Sloane summoned me to my old office, now decked with meditation cushions, and demanded everything I knew about Westfield Industries, especially the undocumented details. I gave her the bare essentials, Catherine's daughter's therapy schedule, her communication preferences, but left out the unspoken nuances that made those relationships work. That night I called Catherine from my personal line. She was furious. They expect me to renew without you managing the account? She saw right through it. My advisory role was just a stopgap before they cut me loose. The next day Sloane confronted me, accusing me of hoarding knowledge. I handed over a sanitized client summary and watched her frown through it. At the monthly review, she unveiled a plan to systematize client service, turning relationships into templated workflows. My team exchanged glances. This won't work, Lindsay whispered afterward. Grayson chose us because we're not transactional. I said nothing. But my phone buzzed. Elliot again. Declined their new framework. What's really going on, Harlow? By week 6, complaints had tripled. 4 accounts were shopping around. Grayson, our $2 million anchor client, was on the brink. You have to do something, Derek pressed in the break room. I stirred my coffee. I'm just supporting the team. But the cracks were spreading, and I'd already mapped everyone. I'm confident Sloane has a strategy, I said, stirring my coffee. Derek lowered his voice. The team's bailing. Lindsay's got an interview next week. That got my attention. Lindsay's leaving? Sloane trashed her entire methodology for some cookie-cutter grad school framework. The insights are useless now. Lindsay was brilliant. Losing her would gut us. What do you want me to do? I asked quietly. Something. You always had a plan B. Plans take time, I said. Sometimes you let things unfold. He shook his head. While you wait, everything you built is crumbling. As he walked off, Sloane appeared in the doorway. My office. Now. Her usually pristine space was chaos. Papers everywhere, stress radiating off her. The quarterly projections are due tomorrow, she snapped. The numbers make no sense. The ones from your new system? She thrust a report at me. Your team's sabotaging me. Client scores are tanking, revenues collapsing. I scanned it. Not sabotage. Reality. For clients downgraded. Grayson's likely walking. You turned them against me. Clients react to how you treat them. Relationships matter. They limit scalability. Brandon agrees, we need standardized processes. Then take it up with him. Her eyes narrowed. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I want this department to survive. But I don't run it anymore. Then fix it, she demanded, voice cracking. Take over the presentation. Save me from getting fired. Bingo. I'll need full access to client files and Lindsay back on my team. He hesitated, then nodded. Fine. Do it. I left with the smallest smile. The pieces were falling into place. That night Lindsay found me deep in data. Saving her career? Just reporting the truth. He studied me. You're orchestrating something. The numbers speak for themselves, I said. And she's presenting them exactly as they are. Lindsay's eyes lit up. You're letting her fail in front of the execs. Accurately. Professionally. That's all. We worked until dawn, crafting a presentation that was flawless. And devastating. As the sun rose, Lindsay whistled. This either gets you your job back, or gets you fired. I hit send. Sometimes you have to risk everything to gain anything. The next morning, Sloane stood before the execs, pale as she clicked through our slides. 43% drop in client satisfaction, 50% fall in new business, revenue projections in freefall. Transitional challenges, she stammered. Brandon's face darkened. This is a collapse. When she tried to pivot to standardized frameworks, Natalie cut in. Our advantage is personal service. Brandon snapped his laptop shut. Harlow, can you save Grayson? Possibly. I'll call him today. As the room emptied, Sloane cornered me. You set me up. The data was real. You're waiting to swoop in and take back your throne. I didn't break it, I said calmly. I'm just helping clean up. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It's not. Back at my desk, I dialed Malcolm Grayson. Harlow, finally. What the hell is going on over there? Growing pains, I said. Let's meet. Usual place. Noon. I hung up to find Brandon hovering, eyes wide with hope. Well? He asked. He's agreed to meet. I'll handle it personally. Relief washed visibly across his features. Excellent. That's excellent. He hesitated. Listen, Harlow, perhaps we were premature in restructuring your role. Once this situation stabilizes, we should discuss your position more thoroughly. I nodded noncommittally. Of course. For the next 2 weeks, I moved methodically through our client list, meeting personally with each one, addressing concerns and rebuilding confidence that had been shaken by abrupt changes. The team's mood lightened noticeably as accounts stabilized. Sloane grew increasingly marginalized, relegated to administrative functions while I handled all significant client relations. The power shift was subtle but unmistakable. When I spoke in meetings, people listened intently. When Sloane attempted to assert authority, eyes would shift my way for confirmation. Exactly 19 days after the quarterly presentation, Brandon called me into his office. Sloane sat stiffly in one chair. Natalie from the board occupied another. Harlow, thank you for joining us, Brandon began, his executive smile firmly positioned. In light of recent developments, we've been comprehensively re-evaluating our organizational structure. I settled into the remaining chair, expression neutral. The board feels we made an error in judgment, Natalie said directly. Your leadership is clearly essential to the department's success. We'd like to reinstate you as Director of Client Services, Brandon continued. Sloane will transition to a supporting role focusing on internal operations. Reporting to you. I let the silence stretch uncomfortably before responding. That's a generous offer. However, I'm afraid I must respectfully decline. All three stared at me in obvious shock. Decline. Brandon repeated incredulously. But your position, everything would return to how it was. Not quite everything, I said calmly. My trust in this organization's leadership has been fundamentally damaged. That can't be restored with a title change. Natalie leaned forward. We understand your frustration, but this isn't about frustration, I interrupted gently. This is about recognizing value. If that value is only acknowledged during crisis, then perhaps my capabilities would be better appreciated elsewhere. Brandon's expression darkened. You're threatening to leave? Now. Not threatening. Informing. I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it across the desk. This is my formal resignation, effective immediately. This is absurd, Brandon sputtered. You can't just. I can, I said. And I have another announcement. As of yesterday, I've established my own consulting firm. Natalie has already reviewed my business proposal. I turned to her. Isn't that correct? Natalie had the grace to look uncomfortable under Brandon's shocked stare. You approached our board member? Brandon asked, genuinely incredulous. Actually, she approached me, Natalie admitted, with a very compelling business proposition. I'll be offering specialized consulting services focused on relationship-based client management, I explained. Natalie recognized the potential value immediately. Brandon's face reddened. This is a direct conflict of interest. Your contract has non-compete clauses, which apply only to direct competitors in our specific market sector, I finished for him. My firm operates in an advisory capacity across multiple industries. Perfectly legal. My attorney confirmed it thoroughly. Your clients will follow you, Sloane said quietly, speaking for the first time. You've been planning this from the beginning. I turned to her. Not all of them. Only those who value relationship continuity over corporate structure. My firm will be highly selective about clientele. Brandon slammed his hand on the desk. This is completely unacceptable. After everything this company has invested in you. After 14 years of dedication, I was discarded without consideration, I corrected him calmly. That clarified my value to this organization perfectly. I stood to leave, then paused. Oh, and you should know, Lindsay from Analytics and Derek from Operations have accepted positions with my new firm. They'll be submitting their resignations this afternoon. The silence that followed was profound. You can try to fight this, Brandon finally said, voice tight with anger. But you'll lose. We have resources you can't possibly match. I smiled slightly. Resources aren't everything, Brandon. As you're discovering, sometimes relationships matter more than organizational charts. As I walked out, Natalie called after me. We should continue our discussion about that board advisory position. I nodded without turning back. My assistant will schedule it. 4 months later, my firm occupied an entire floor in a prestigious downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the waterfront. 17 former colleagues had joined me, bringing their expertise and client relationships. Our roster included 9 major accounts that had followed us from Vantage Consulting Group, plus 14 new ones drawn by our reputation for relationship-focused service delivery. Sloane had been terminated within 3 weeks of my departure. Brandon had been forced into early retirement by the board after the department's performance continued deteriorating. The company had lost 40% of their client services revenue in a single quarter. On a crisp autumn morning, I sat across from Elliot Thornberry at our usual breakfast spot, the same restaurant where we'd met quarterly for 9 years. He raised his coffee cup in a small toast. To brilliant strategy, he said with an appreciative smile. When did you first start planning your exit? I sipped my tea before answering. The moment I noticed Brandon bringing Sloane to executive meetings 4 months before my demotion. The signs were obvious to anyone paying attention. A wise strategist always recognizes the signals, Elliot observed. And you let the situation deteriorate intentionally. I simply stepped back and allowed natural consequences to unfold, I corrected gently. The most effective response isn't orchestrating someone's failure. It's creating your own success from their mistakes. Elliot laughed appreciatively. You know, Brandon called me personally last week. Offered a substantial discount to bring our business back to Vantage. And I told him relationships aren't built on discounts. They're built on trust, consistency, and genuine understanding. He gestured around the bustling restaurant. Like this breakfast tradition we've maintained every month for 9 years. My phone buzzed with a message from Iris. Grayson contract signed. 3-year commitment. Celebration dinner tonight? I smiled, typing back my confirmation before returning my attention to Elliot. The most powerful contingency plan isn't about destruction, I said thoughtfully. It's about creation. Building something better from what others failed to value. A lesson Brandon learned far too late, Elliot observed. Some lessons are expensive, I agreed. Through the restaurant window, I could see my new offices reflecting the morning sunlight. Inside those walls, my team, people who had chosen to follow me, were building something remarkable together. Something that valued relationships over rigid processes, experience over youthful innovation for its own sake, and loyalty over short-term cost savings. The view from this side of the harbor was infinitely better than the one I'd had before. 3 weeks after opening my firm, I received an unexpected call from Catherine Westfield. Her voice carried a mixture of amusement and vindication. Harlow, you won't believe what just happened. Vantage sent someone new to pitch for our contract renewal. 3rd person in 2 months. Who did they send? Some nervous young man named Trevor. Nice enough, but he knew absolutely nothing about our business. He kept calling Emma my daughter, without using her name, like she was just a demographic detail in a file somewhere. I shook my head. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Don't be sorry. It made my decision incredibly easy. I've already signed with your firm. And I told Brandon exactly why, because you understand that business relationships are human relationships first. After we finalized the details, I sat back in my new office chair, looking at the growing list of clients who had made similar choices. Each name represented years of genuine connection, not just transactional exchanges. Lindsay knocked on my open door. You have a minute? Always. What's on your mind? She settled into the chair across from my desk. I just got off the phone with someone from Vantage. They're trying to recruit me back. Offered a 20% salary increase. My stomach tightened slightly, though I kept my expression calm. That's a significant offer. It is, Lindsay agreed. Which is why I told them no immediately. You know what the recruiter said? That they're rebuilding their analytical capabilities and need experienced talent. Rebuilding what you already built once, I observed. Exactly. They had something exceptional and threw it away because it didn't look like what they thought they wanted. Now they're scrambling to recreate it and wondering why it's so difficult. She leaned forward. I'm not interested in being part of their second attempt to value what they should have appreciated the first time. I appreciate your loyalty, Lindsay. But I want you to make decisions based on what's best for your career, not just. This is what's best for my career, she interrupted firmly. Working with someone who values expertise and trusts their team's judgment. Building something new instead of trying to resurrect something they killed. That's where I want to be. After Lindsay left, I pulled up my calendar for the coming weeks. Every slot was filled with client meetings, new business pitches, and strategic planning sessions. We were growing faster than I'd projected, and the work was both challenging and deeply satisfying. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Gavin Porter from Vantage HR. I hesitated, then answered. Hello, Gavin. Harlow, thank you for taking my call. I know this might be awkward, but I wanted to reach out personally. What can I do for you? I wanted to apologize, he said, his voice carrying genuine regret. The way your transition was handled, I should have pushed back harder. I knew it was wrong, but I told myself it wasn't my place to question executive decisions. I was quiet for a moment. I appreciate you saying that. You deserved better. 14 years of exemplary service, and we treated you like you were expendable. I've been in HR for 22 years, and that decision ranks among the worst I've witnessed. Why are you calling now, Gavin? He sighed. Honestly, because I'm watching the same pattern repeat itself. Brandon's replacement is already talking about fresh energy in other departments. Long-term employees are being viewed as obstacles rather than assets. I'm watching institutional knowledge walk out the door every week. And you're wondering if you should be one of them, I said, understanding. I'm 57 years old, Harlow. I always assumed I'd retire from Vantage. Now I'm not sure this is the company I thought it was. Sometimes organizations change in ways that no longer align with our values. There's no shame in recognizing that and making different choices. Are you hiring HR professionals? He asked with a slight laugh. Not currently, but I'll keep you in mind as we grow. In the meantime, document everything. Protect yourself. And trust your instincts. After we hung up, I realized how many others at Vantage must be feeling similar disillusionment. The company had lost more than specific employees. It had damaged trust throughout the organization. That evening, Iris joined me for dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant. She'd insisted on celebrating the 3-month anniversary of my firm's launch. So, Mom, tell me honestly, is this better than having the director position back? She asked over appetizers. I considered the question carefully. It's different. More challenging in some ways. I'm responsible for everything now: payroll, insurance, business development, strategic direction. But yes, it's better. Because you're in control? Because I'm building something that reflects my actual values. At Vantage, I spent years navigating corporate politics and compromise. Now, when I make decisions about how we treat clients or develop our team, those decisions stick. There's clarity in that. Iris smiled. You seem happier. More yourself. I feel more myself, I admitted. For years, I shaped who I was to fit what Vantage needed. I didn't even realize how much I'd been compressing myself until I stopped. Do you think you would have left eventually, even without the demotion? I paused, considering. Honestly, probably not. I'd invested so much time and energy that leaving felt like admitting failure. The demotion forced me to recognize that staying would have been the real failure. Staying somewhere that didn't value what I brought. So in a weird way, Brandon did you a favor. I laughed. I wouldn't go that far. But he certainly accelerated a realization I might have avoided for years. 6 months after launching my firm, we held our first all-company retreat at a resort outside the city. Watching my team interact, people from Vantage mixed with new hires who joined our vision, I felt profound satisfaction. This was what I'd been trying to build all along, even when I didn't fully recognize it. During dinner, Derek stood to make a toast. 6 months ago, most of us were watching something we'd built slowly fall apart. We felt helpless, frustrated, and undervalued. Harlow showed us that sometimes the answer isn't fighting to save something that others are determined to destroy. Sometimes the answer is building something new that can't be taken away. Glasses raised around the table. Lindsay added, to Harlow for teaching us that our value doesn't depend on anyone else's recognition of it. I felt unexpected emotion tighten my throat. To all of you, I responded, for having the courage to take a risk on something unproven. This firm exists because you believed in the vision before it became reality. Later that evening, I stood on the resort balcony, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the sunset. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Hello. Harlow Kennedy. This is Angela Roth from Collaborative Industries. I straightened. Collaborative Industries was one of the largest firms in our sector. Yes, this is Harlow. I've been following the growth of your consulting firm with great interest. I wonder if you might have time for a conversation about a potential partnership. What kind of partnership? We're looking to develop a relationship management division using methodologies similar to what you've built. We believe your approach could be scaled across our client base, and we'd like to explore whether your firm might be interested in a strategic alliance. My mind raced through implications. That's intriguing. I'd certainly be open to a conversation. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. After hanging up, I realized I was standing at a crossroads I never could have imagined 6 months earlier. The small consulting firm I'd started as an escape from corporate betrayal was becoming something much larger. I called Natalie, the board member who'd first supported my venture. Major development, I told her, explaining the call from Collaborative Industries. That's extraordinary, Harlow. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I need to be very careful. I built this firm on specific principles. Any partnership needs to align with those values, not compromise them. Smart. But don't be afraid of growth just because it looks like the corporate world you left. You're in control now. You get to set the terms. Her words stayed with me as I prepared for the meeting with Collaborative Industries. She was right. I was negotiating from a position of strength now, not desperation. The meeting took place in a sleek conference room in their headquarters. Angela Roth was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s who got straight to business. We've lost 3 major clients in the past year to smaller firms that provide more personalized service. Our leadership recognizes we've become too focused on scalability at the expense of relationships. Your firm represents the model we need to emulate. Emulate or acquire? I asked directly. She smiled. Direct. I appreciate that. We're open to either arrangement depending on your preferences. Acquisition would mean significant capital and resources. Partnership would maintain your independence while allowing collaboration. What would partnership look like specifically? Your firm would handle relationship management for our top-tier clients. We'd provide infrastructure support, expanded resources and referral networks. Revenue sharing on joint accounts, complete operational independence for your team. I spent 2 hours asking detailed questions, probing for hidden agendas or control mechanisms. Angela answered everything directly. By the end I had a clear picture, and a decision to make. I need to discuss this with my team, I told her. This affects all of us. Of course. Take the time you need. This is too important to rush. Back at our offices I called an emergency meeting with my senior team, Lindsay, Derek, and 3 others who'd become integral to our operations. I laid out the opportunity completely. This could accelerate our growth by years. But it also means partnering with exactly the kind of large organization we left. I won't make this decision unilaterally. The discussion lasted 3 hours. Concerns were raised, benefits analyzed, risks assessed. Finally, Lindsay spoke what everyone seemed to be thinking. The question isn't whether Collaborative Industries is perfect. It's whether we can maintain our principles while accessing their resources. If we have genuine independence and Angela's proposal is legally binding, this could allow us to help more clients without compromising what makes us effective. Derek nodded. We left Vantage because they didn't value relationships. We're not going back to that. But if Collaborative genuinely wants to learn from our approach while respecting our autonomy, that's different. After more discussion we reached consensus. We'd negotiate the partnership, with strong protections for our operational independence and clear boundaries around decision-making authority. The negotiations took 6 weeks. My attorney earned every penny of his fee, crafting an agreement that gave us access to Collaborative's resources while maintaining our control over client relationships and team management. The day we signed the partnership agreement, I received an unexpected email from Brandon Whitlock, the former CEO of Vantage. Harlow, I saw the announcement about your partnership with Collaborative Industries. Congratulations on your success. I wanted to reach out because I owe you an apology I should have made months ago. The decision to restructure your role was short-sighted and poorly executed. I allowed concerns about cost and modernization to override recognition of genuine value. I'm no longer with Vantage. The board requested my resignation after the client services collapse. I'm doing some consulting now, ironically, and I've gained perspective on how crucial experienced relationship managers are to business success. Your success doesn't surprise me. Your grace throughout a difficult situation was remarkable. I hope you can accept my apology, even though it comes far too late to change what happened. Best wishes, Brandon. I read the email twice, examining my feelings. Anger had faded months ago, replaced by something more like understanding. Brandon had made poor decisions driven by flawed assumptions. He'd paid a professional price for those decisions just as Vantage had. I replied simply, Brandon, I appreciate the apology. I hope your consulting work is fulfilling. The experience was difficult, but it ultimately led me somewhere better. I wish you well. Harlow. That evening, Iris came over for dinner at my new apartment. Larger than my old place with a genuine home office instead of working at the kitchen counter. You replied to Brandon's email? She asked, incredulous after I told her. I did. You're not angry anymore? Not really. What would anger accomplish now? He made mistakes, faced consequences, and apparently learned something. That's more than many people do. Iris shook her head, smiling. You're more forgiving than I'd be. Not forgiveness exactly. More like closure. That chapter ended. I've moved into a completely different book now. A better book? I looked around my home office, visible through the doorway, framed photos of my team, the partnership agreement on display, a calendar packed with meaningful work. Definitely a better book. 1 year after my departure from Vantage, my firm celebrated our anniversary with the entire team. We'd grown to 32 employees. Our client list included 18 major accounts. The partnership with Collaborative Industries had exceeded projections, and we were exploring expansion into 2 new markets. During the celebration, I took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. A year earlier, I'd been sitting in a sterile conference room listening to Gavin Porter explain that I was being replaced. I'd felt betrayed, diminished, and uncertain about my future. Now I stood in offices I'd built, surrounded by people who'd chosen to follow my leadership, working with clients who valued our approach and partnering with an organization that respected our independence. The demotion that had felt like an ending had actually been a beginning. Lindsay found me on the balcony overlooking the harbor. Thinking deep thoughts? Just reflecting. This time last year I thought my career was essentially over. And instead you built something better than what you had. We built something better, I corrected. This doesn't exist without the team who believed in the vision. True. But the vision was yours. You saw the possibility when the rest of us just saw disaster. I saw it because I had to, I admitted. When you have no choice but to move forward, you start seeing opportunities you'd never notice otherwise. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching boats move across the water. You know what the best part is? Lindsay asked. We get to do this work without the corporate nonsense. No political maneuvering, no fighting for resources, no wondering if we'll be the next ones deemed obsolete when someone wants to make their mark. That is pretty satisfying, I agreed. The next morning I arrived at the office to find an unexpected visitor waiting in our lobby. Sloane Fitzgerald sat in one of the reception chairs, looking uncomfortable but determined. I paused, surprised, then gestured toward my office. Would you like to talk? She followed me in, closing the door behind her. Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would. What can I do for you, Sloane? She took a breath. I wanted to apologize. For how I acted at Vantage, for the things I said, for everything. I was arrogant and dismissive, and I didn't recognize what I didn't know. I settled into my chair, studying her. What prompted this? Honestly, I've spent the past year trying to rebuild my career after being fired from Vantage. It's been humbling. I've realized how much I took for granted, especially the knowledge and relationships you'd built over 14 years. I treated that like it was nothing, like it could be replaced with frameworks and processes. It was a painful lesson, I said carefully. It was. I'm working at a much smaller firm now, reporting to someone with extensive experience. She's been teaching me what real relationship management looks like. It's made me understand how badly I failed at Vantage. She met my eyes. I'm not asking for a job or anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. You were trying to help, and I was too insecure and defensive to recognize it. I appreciated the honesty. I accept your apology, Sloane. We all make mistakes, especially early in our careers. The important thing is learning from them. I am learning. Slowly. She stood to leave. Congratulations on everything you've built. It's impressive. After she left, I sat thinking about the conversation. There was something satisfying about her recognition of what had happened, but more than that, there was a sense of completion. The anger and hurt from that period had fully transformed into something else. Wisdom, maybe, or simply perspective. That afternoon, I had a video call scheduled with Elliot Thornberry to discuss expanding our services for his company. Before we dive into business, he said, I wanted to tell you something. I ran into Brandon Whitlock at a conference last week. Oh. He asked about you. Specifically, he asked if I thought you'd ever consider coming back to work in a corporate environment. I got the impression he was thinking about trying to recruit you for something. I laughed. What did you tell him? I told him that ship had sailed, sunk, and been salvaged for parts. You've built something better than any corporate position could offer. That's accurate. But it got me thinking, Elliot continued, about how organizations often don't recognize value until they've lost it. Brandon spent 9 years working with you, watching you build that department, and somehow still didn't understand what made you effective until after you'd left. It's a common pattern, I observed. People confuse familiarity with expendability. They assume that because something has always been there, it always will be. Expensive assumption. Very expensive. Vantage lost roughly 60% of their client services revenue in the first year after I left. That's millions in recurring business. All because someone thought fresh perspectives were more valuable than proven relationships. Well, I said thoughtfully. Fresh perspectives do have value. The mistake was believing they could replace experience rather than complement it. Sloane wasn't wrong to want to bring new approaches. She was wrong to dismiss everything that came before as obsolete. Wisdom and diplomacy, Elliot said with a smile. This is why you're successful, Harlow. You can see nuance where others only see conflict. After the call, I reviewed our growth projections for the coming year. We were positioned to double our client base. The partnership with Collaborative Industries was opening doors to opportunities one couldn't have accessed independently. Several employees had approached me about profit sharing and ownership stakes, indicating they saw this as a long-term career, not just a job. I was building something that would outlast me, something with real sustainability and purpose. My phone rang. Iris calling. Hey, sweetheart. Mom, I have news. I got accepted to the graduate program in business management. Pride swelled in my chest. Iris, that's wonderful. Congratulations. I was thinking about my thesis topic. I want to study organizational change and the hidden costs of short-term thinking in corporate restructuring. Basically, I want to write about what happened to you. I was quiet for a moment. That's a powerful topic. It's everywhere, Mom. Companies constantly undervalue experienced employees in favor of cheaper, younger workers, then act surprised when performance declines. But nobody really quantifies the full cost. Lost relationships, institutional knowledge, team morale, client trust. I want to build a framework for measuring it. That could be genuinely valuable research. I learned from the best, she said warmly. Watching how you handled everything taught me more about leadership and strategy than any class ever could. After we hung up, I felt profound gratitude. The painful experience at Vantage had become a teaching moment for my daughter, transforming personal betrayal into academic insight that might help others avoid similar mistakes. Everything that had felt like destruction a year ago had actually been reconstruction. Not just of my career but of my understanding of value, success, and what truly mattered in professional life. 2 years after leaving Vantage, my firm was featured in a major business publication under the headline, Relationship Renaissance: How One Consultant is Proving That Personal Connection Still Matters in Business. The article detailed our growth, our partnership with Collaborative Industries, and our approach to client management. It quoted several clients explaining why they'd chosen us over larger competitors. The final paragraph particularly resonated. In an era of automation and scaling, Kennedy has built a thriving business on a seemingly old-fashioned principle: that business relationships are human relationships first. Her success suggests that reports of relationship-based business models being obsolete may have been greatly exaggerated. The article generated significant interest. We received dozens of inquiries from potential clients and several offers from other firms interested in partnerships or acquisitions. During a team meeting to discuss how to handle the increased attention, Derek raised an important question. How do we scale without compromising what makes us effective? We can't personally manage relationships with 100 clients the way we do with 20. It was the central tension of our growth. I'd been thinking about it for months. We scale by replicating the model, not the individuals, I proposed. We create small teams, each managing a limited number of client relationships. We provide training, support, and infrastructure, but we trust those teams to build genuine connections. We hire people who understand that client service is about people, not processes. Lindsay nodded. Essentially, we grow by creating multiple small firms under one umbrella, rather than becoming one large firm. Exactly. We maintain the intimacy and personal connection that makes us effective while expanding our capacity. The model took 6 months to implement. We hired carefully, selecting people who demonstrated both competence and genuine interpersonal skills. We created comprehensive training programs that emphasized relationship building, not just technical skills. We structured teams to maintain low client-to-staff ratios. It worked remarkably well. 3 years after my departure from Vantage, the company made headlines for entirely different reasons. They'd been acquired by a larger firm, primarily for their client list rather than their operational capabilities. Most of the remaining staff were let go in the consolidation. The brand that had existed for 42 years effectively ceased to exist. I read the news with mixed feelings. There was no satisfaction in seeing an organization crumble, even one that had treated me poorly. Too many good people had their careers disrupted through no fault of their own. But there was also validation. The short-term thinking that had led to my departure had been symptomatic of deeper problems. Organizations that devalue experienced employees, prioritize cost over quality, and chase trends rather than building sustainable practices rarely survive long-term. That evening, I attended a networking event where I encountered someone I hadn't seen in years. Natalie, the board member who'd first supported my consulting firm. Harlow. I was hoping you'd be here. She hugged me warmly. Did you see the news about Vantage? I did. It's unfortunate. It's predictable, she corrected. I resigned from their board 18 months ago because I could see where things were heading. Leadership kept making the same mistakes, prioritizing image over substance, cutting investments in relationships, chasing short-term wins at the expense of long-term sustainability. It didn't have to end that way. No, it didn't. But it did end that way because they fundamentally misunderstood their own business. They thought they were selling consulting services. You understood you were building trust. That's the difference between surviving and thriving. Later in the evening, I found myself in conversation with a young professional named Grace who reminded me remarkably of Sloane. Enthusiastic, confident, fresh out of graduate school. I'm trying to figure out my career path, she confided. Everyone says I need to be aggressive, make bold moves, disrupt established practices. But I keep thinking that sounds more destructive than constructive. Bold moves have their place, I said carefully. But wisdom comes from knowing when to innovate and when to preserve. The most effective professionals I know aren't the ones who reject everything that came before. They're the ones who understand what's worth keeping and build on that foundation. How do you know the difference? Experience mostly. And humility. Recognizing that just because you don't understand why something exists doesn't mean it's not valuable. Ask questions before making changes. Understand the system before attempting to rebuild it. Grace nodded thoughtfully. I wish more senior people would share that perspective instead of just complaining about younger workers. And I wish more younger professionals would seek that perspective instead of assuming experience equals obsolescence, I replied with a smile. The best workplaces bridge that gap, combining innovation with wisdom, fresh energy with deep knowledge. Is that what you've built with your firm? We're trying. It's an ongoing process, not a destination. 4 years after activating my Plan B, I stood before a conference audience delivering a keynote speech about organizational change and relationship management. The audience included business leaders, HR professionals, and management consultants, many of them wrestling with similar challenges to what I'd experienced at Vantage. The question I'm asked most frequently, I told them, is how to balance efficiency with relationship building. How to scale personal connection. How to modernize without losing what makes an organization effective. I paused, making eye contact across the room. The answer is that you can't separate them. Efficiency without relationship becomes transaction. Scaling without personal connection becomes standardization. Modernization without respect for proven practices becomes disruption for its own sake. The most successful organizations, the ones that thrive long-term, understand that relationships aren't an obstacle to efficiency. They're the foundation of it. I shared the story of my departure from Vantage, though without naming the company. I described watching a department collapse when relationships were dismissed as obsolete. I explained how we'd built our firm on the opposite principle, that human connection drives business success. The lesson isn't that change is bad, I emphasized. Change is essential. But effective change builds on strengths rather than dismissing them. It asks, what's valuable here that we should preserve? Before asking what should we eliminate? It recognizes that experienced employees aren't expensive liabilities. They're invaluable assets if their knowledge is properly valued and utilized. The speech received a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of people approached with questions, stories of similar experiences, and requests for consultations. Many were organizations recognizing they'd made mistakes similar to Vantage and wanted guidance on rebuilding relationships with clients or employees. Among them was a woman in her 50s who waited until the crowd had thinned. "Thank you for that speech," she said quietly. "I'm currently in exactly the situation you described. My company is restructuring my role, bringing in younger leadership, suggesting I transition to a less prominent position. I've been feeling like maybe I really am obsolete, like maybe they're right that I can't adapt." "You're not obsolete," I said firmly. Your experience has tremendous value. The question is whether your current organization recognizes that value. If they don't, other organizations will. That's terrifying though. Starting over at my age. It is terrifying. It's also potentially liberating. I won't lie and say it's easy. But I will tell you that my only regret is not recognizing sooner that an organization that doesn't value my contributions doesn't deserve my loyalty. She nodded slowly, determination replacing despair in her expression. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Watching her walk away, I thought about how many talented professionals were probably experiencing similar situations at that very moment, being pushed aside by organizations that couldn't distinguish between experience and expense, between wisdom and obsolescence. That evening, back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and began writing. Not a business document or client proposal, but something different. A guide for professionals facing corporate betrayal and navigating career transitions. I wrote about recognizing warning signs, building financial reserves, documenting your contributions, maintaining external relationships, developing contingency plans before you need them, knowing your value independent of any organization's recognition. I wrote until early morning, channeling years of experience into practical advice. By dawn, I had a rough draft of what would eventually become a book. 6 months later, that book was published, Plan B, Building Career Security in an Unstable Corporate World. It combined personal narrative with practical guidance, offering both emotional support and strategic advice for professionals navigating career upheaval. The book resonated deeply. I received hundreds of messages from readers who'd experienced similar situations. Forced retirements, demotions in favor of younger workers, departures from organizations that had stopped valuing their contributions. One message particularly moved me from a 61-year-old engineer named Lawrence. I was 3 years from retirement when my company eliminated my position. I felt discarded and worthless. Your book helped me recognize that my expertise had value, even if my former employer couldn't see it. I've started consulting and am busier than I was before, working with companies that appreciate experience. Thank you for showing me that this wasn't an ending, it was a transition to something better. 5 years after leaving Vantage, I sat in my office reflecting on an extraordinary journey. My firm now employed 83 people across 4 offices. We'd expanded into international markets. Our client list included some of the most respected organizations in multiple industries. The partnership with Collaborative Industries had evolved into a model that other firms were studying and attempting to replicate. But beyond the business metrics, what filled me with deepest satisfaction was the culture we'd built. A workplace where experience was valued, relationships were prioritized, and people felt genuinely appreciated for their contributions. Lindsay knocked on my open door. Got a minute? Always. She settled into the chair across from my desk, grinning. Remember 5 years ago when we were working through the night on that quarterly presentation for Sloan? How could I forget? Did you know then how everything would turn out? I considered the question carefully. I knew I wasn't going to let them destroy what I'd built. I knew I had value that extended beyond Vantage's recognition of it. But honestly, I couldn't have imagined this. I was thinking about survival and validation. I wasn't thinking about building something that would become this significant. That's what I love about the story, Lindsay said. You didn't start with a master plan to build an empire. You started with a plan to survive with dignity. Everything else grew from that foundation. He was right. Plan B hadn't been about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It had been about recognizing my own worth and building from that foundation. The success that followed wasn't the result of brilliant strategy. It was the natural consequence of refusing to accept someone else's diminished assessment of my value. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Elliot Thornberry with a subject line that made me smile. Guess who called me? The message explained that Brandon Whitlock had reached out again, this time asking if Elliot thought I might be interested in acquiring some of Vantage's client contracts as they were dissolved in the acquisition. He seemed to think you might want to bring some of the old team back together, Elliot wrote. I told him you'd already done exactly that, just without Vantage. The look on his face when I explained the scope of your firm was priceless. Some people never quite understand what they've lost. I replied briefly, thanking Elliot for the message but declining interest in Vantage's contracts. That chapter was completely closed. My firm had its own identity, its own clients and its own trajectory. We weren't trying to resurrect what Vantage had destroyed. We'd built something entirely new. As I prepared to leave the office, I paused to look around. Photos of the team lined one wall. Group shots from retreats, celebrations, and everyday moments. Client appreciation notes were framed alongside the business licenses and partnership agreements. My daughter Iris smiled from a photograph on my desk, holding up her master's thesis on organizational change. This office, this firm, this career, none of it would exist if Vantage hadn't pushed me out. The betrayal that had felt devastating had actually been liberation. Plan B hadn't been my backup option. It had been my breakthrough. If you've stayed with me to the end of this story, thank you for listening. Sometimes the most painful professional experiences become the catalysts for our greatest achievements. Being pushed out wasn't the end of my career. It was the beginning of the career I was actually meant to have. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about resilience, strategic thinking, and finding success on your own terms in the face of workplace challenges. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to activate a plan B when your professional life took an unexpected turn? Your experiences and insights matter, and I'd genuinely love to hear from you. Remember, your value isn't determined by any single organization's ability to recognize it. Sometimes the best response to being undervalued isn't fighting to prove your worth where it's not appreciated. It's building something new where that worth is the foundation.